Welcome to my next set of 10 board games in this Top 100 series. This time we're going to be looking at entries numbers 61 through 70, and the theme this time is the beginning of the March of the Euros, as we have the majority of this list being either straight up Euro games or games that have at least some Euro elements. So let's get started. My number 70 is Small World, which is down 7 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 5 and plays 2 to 5 players. Small World is something of a rather abstracted war game. You are fighting each other, but the combat is almost entirely deterministic. You either have enough chips to boot the guys out of their spot or you don't. If you do, you can put your guys there instead. There are a number of special powers that are involved. It plays in about, I believe, 8 to 10 rounds, and then you're done. It scales really well. It plays equally well at 2 to 5 players, although it is a little bit different as a 2-player game because you've only got one other person to worry about. So you don't really have to choose, oh, who am I going to target this time? It has a cool theme of just fantasy races butting each other out of a very limited battlefield. And it plays rather smoothly and basically comes down to victory points. So it is a Euro game in some senses. It's just really solid. I've played it more on the app than I have in person, although I've played it a few times in person, and I like it either way. I always tend to prefer games in person if I can, but the app is pretty good. I would recommend this to people who are looking for something maybe just a little bit more involved than standard gateway games, like a lot of the games that were on my list last time. It's not overwhelmingly complicated, but it has enough going on that it's maybe an introduction for someone who you think is going to be particularly adept at picking up rules but hasn't played anything. That is my number 70, Small World. My number 69 is Stockpile, which is down 21 spots. Its weight is about 3 and will support 3 to 5 players. Stockpile is a game that has, for me, replaced a game from my childhood, which was called Stock Ticker, which really doesn't have that much to it other than just the general strategy of buy low, sell high. But I did enjoy it at the time, and I did like the custom dice that it used and the sort of, I think I can get some money out of that stock that seems to be really low, and maybe it'll go up in overall value versus something else. And for whatever reason, gold always seemed to tank in our games. I don't know how that's possible given the sort of dice that it used. Stockpile is much more streamlined. What it does is it gives you some inside information on what the stocks are going to do, either going up or down. It gives you the ability to play some cards that affect whether a stock goes up or down, and it also lets you sell immediately before the market adjusts if you want to. And so what can happen is if you have some information that steel is going to go down, or you might just be bluffing it, and you sell steel, everyone else around the table is like, oh, he sold steel. Maybe he knows something about steel going down. I'm going to sell my steel too before someone else does. And that may or may not be the case, that the person who first sold steel and causes a cascade of steel selling, it has inside information, but the possibility that it's there affects the game. It's also got a very straightforward auctioning system where you auction for sets of cards, some of which are face up, some of which are face down, by selecting preset amounts of money that they're worth. So you could bid 0, 1, 3, 6, 10, etc., all the way up to, I think, 50. And what that does is it adds a little bit of how much are these things going to be worth to you, and how much do you want to bet on there being something good for the card that's face down. You're only going to know what's on the face down card that you put out there, but the rest of them, you're just going to have to base on whether other people who maybe put some of those cards out are betting on that pile or not. It's a clever system. It's fairly easy to teach. I wish it had a little bit better of a reference card of some sort in there instead of just listing the title of each of the game's 5 or so phases, because that would certainly help playing it a little bit more smoothly and teaching the game. But as it is, it's a good sort of game that sort of straddles the line between being a gateway game and a next step. And if you've got someone who's just attracted to the idea of just buying and selling stock and making large piles of money, this theme can be actually kind of exciting. And it's very accessible, so you can play it with a lot of different people. So that is my number 69, Stockpile. My number 68 is Gloomhaven, and I don't know how long I can hold this here. Gloomhaven is new to my list. Its weight is a 9, not literally, because if I was talking about actual weight in pounds, it would be much higher than that, and it plays 1 to 4 players. So Gloomhaven, I'm going to put this down now, is a game I've only played once with multiple players, and the rest of the times I've played it, it has been solo. It is a game about going through a dungeon, fighting off creatures, very much like something like Descent or Imperial Assault, the Star Wars game, neither of which I have played, but I at least understand they're conceptually similar. What makes this game a little bit different is that it uses a card system where you have to manage cards so that you get to play based on the lowest numbered initiative on the 2 cards that you play, and then you have to play either the top half from one card and the bottom half from the other card, or the bottom half from that second card and the top half from the other card. So there's always this sort of push and pull of like, do you want to do what you initially planned to do? Because you can still do the top and the bottom from the first and the second card if you want. Or you can flip them at the last second if you really need to change things based on how things have gone in the round. And you also have to pick cards based on when you think you're going to get cards in initiative orders that will let you do things when you want to in the round and when you don't want to. It's a very clever system. This is also just, I find, extremely hard. I've been told the designer is a really bright guy, and that may have influenced his idea of what a normal difficulty level is. I'm generally pretty good at games. This game, with the normal difficulty level and the solo bump up in difficulty that he adds, because basically you have all the information, whereas if you were just playing a 2-player game where you were each playing one character each and looking at your own set of cards, you can't communicate what's on the cards to the other player. As a solo player, you know that information, so you're supposed to make it even a little bit tougher on yourself than it normally would be. It's really difficult, and I'm just kind of stubborn because I don't want to concede that I can't play it at the level. I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep playing Gloomhaven until I'm good enough to beat it at that level, which is maybe not the smartest way of playing, but that's just the way I do it. So the thing is, I might have left this off my top 100 for those issues, but I find I just think about this game more often than I do a lot of other games around this area on my list. So that has to count for something, and I do want to keep coming back to it. I do want to play it solo. Honestly, the thing that probably prevents me from playing this more is just that there's so much content in the box that getting everything out and set up and ready to go and then cleaned up and put away again is just a lot of work. I mean, you saw the size of the box. So that's my number 68, Gloomhaven. I recommend it, but maybe everyone else should just get Jaws of the Lion, because that certainly looks easier to get going with, and then move on to the big box if they still feel they want to play more after they're done with it. 68, Gloomhaven. I'm not lifting that box up to the camera again. My number 67 is a game I own, but I don't have here because I have no idea where I put it, or if I lent it to someone or something. Either way, I can't find it. It's called Decrypto, and Decrypto is down 24 spots. Its weight is about a 3, and it plays about 4 to 8 players. Decrypto is maybe a gamer's version of Codenames, where you are trying to give hints based on words, but you're trying to give them to your own team, as opposed to the other team. But the other team gets to hear what you say and gets to try to guess what your code is as well. So how it works is you've got a set of 4 words that are in front of you and a set of 4 words that are in front of the other team. You can only see your own 4 words, and they can only see their own 4 words. You are given a random code sequence, something like 2, 4, 3, which means you have to give a hint for first the second word, then the fourth, then the third. You can give any hint you want, including multiple words, but the other team is going to hear it too, and they're going to record what you said for each hint. So what's going to happen is you're going to guess, and as long as your team gets it right, you're fine. But you take a black token if you get yours wrong. And that's not good, because 2 black tokens means you lose and the other team immediately wins. So you have to be not too obscure. The other team also tries to guess, and they get to, each time you give another hint, get more information. Because what's going to happen is they're going to say, is it 1, 2, 3? And you're going to say, no, actually, it's 2, 4, 3. And they're going to go, oh, okay. And then they're going to write down the hint under 2, the hint under 4, and the hint under 3, and they're going to know, okay, 2 has something to do with water because the second hint was water, and then on a subsequent turn you give a hint like ocean, and people are thinking, oh, okay, it's got to have something to do with like a fish or something, right? So as you go on, the other team's writing down more and more hints that you're giving for these same 4 words, and they're starting to notice patterns, and that will allow them to potentially intercept and guess your sequence. If they do, and they do it twice, they win the game. So you're both trying to not lose the game by not giving hints that are so bad that your team can't guess what words that are staring them in the face those refer to. But you're also trying to guess the other team's words using increasing amounts of information about which words hint at what. So if the 4 column has a bunch of things about being really small or insect-like, maybe that starts to give a bit of a picture, and you start guessing words that sort of fall into that family. It's fairly clever. It's just a little bit more complicated than most party games tend to be. And it does feel necessary. It doesn't feel like you could really play this game in a simplified version that avoids the level of complexity. It's still not complex, but it is maybe a little bit more than you would expect from your typical party game, and maybe a little bit more than you want to hoist on someone who is just looking for something silly and mindless to play with you. There are other better party games for that, but I like this sort of thinkier approach of this game. It's very good. I hope I still own it, and I hope I still have access to it somewhere. Yeah, just maybe it'll turn up at some point, but that's my number 67, Decrypto. It's gotta be somewhere. My number 66 is Teotihuacan, which I nailed the pronunciation of, I'm sure. City of Gods. Teotihuacan is a Euro game that is something of an unofficial sequel to Zolkin, another game I like quite a bit and might be showing up a fair amount of time later on this list. This is fairly solid dice management, where your dice are your workers and you're using them around essentially a big rondel, which is the outer portion of the board, and each space does something different. You got to move your worker there, but the costs are going to be different depending on like which other dice are already there, and you are going to be able to promote your dice. So they start as 1s, but as they get up to about 3s, 4s, and 5s, they're starting to be able to accomplish more things on certain spaces and get you more resources, but those resources can also be increased by having a couple of dice that are on one particular spot, so that you can use a more sophisticated action as a result. There's a lot going on here. It is fairly heavy, it is fairly complex, it is just a lot to take in for someone who's new. And this is not the game that I would push on someone who is going to be easily confused. But it's just such a satisfying game for me to play, just because of all the intricacies of how the game works. The only real complaint I have against it is I didn't particularly like the solo mode that was included here. I thought it was just a little too much bookkeeping for what I'm looking for when I want to play a game solo. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have really enjoyed this game, but as a solo game. There's just a lot of things that add variability to the game, which is lovely. There's a pyramid you can build in the middle, which is quite cool. Lots of different tiles and things that can come out differently at different times and give you points. There are some tracks to race up, which is always a positive for me. I love trying to climb tracks that give you points or bonuses in the game. It just has a lot of things I like about it. It's just very solid, but not quite solid enough that it's one of my absolute favorite games. It's just sort of in that next tier of games, and that's okay. Not everything has to be in that complete upper echelon. This is still a really solid game. I think other people who like this style of game are going to like this one more than I do. So yeah, if you want to check it out, if you're looking for a serious strategy game, Teotihuacan is a really solid one. That is my number 66. My number 65 is Obsession, which is new to my list. Its weight is about a 7 and plays 1 to 4 players. Obsession is a game that I've very recently acquired, and so far I've only played solo, but it's been a solid enough experience by myself that it makes it onto my list. It is a Euro, but a decently thematic one, because the theme of sort of living in 19th century England and hosting parties and being sort of a socialite and part of the gentry actually comes out pretty well here. The decorations on the tiles, I think, look a little plain in maybe video and in pictures if you try to look this up online, but it looks really nice in person. And the old-timey photos that you have of the various gentry that you were inviting into your estate to do things with you is actually pretty cool. The theme of using servants really comes through, as you need different servants for different people, and the more sophisticated and highbrow lady or gentleman that you were inviting on one of your escapades, such as going on the bowling green or going out for afternoon tea, one of those sorts of things, it comes across as it's like, oh, for this guy, I actually need the butler and a valet in order to properly take care of his needs and make sure that he is part of this activity. It's a really cool approach, and the theme of trying to vie for the affection of one of the Fairchild children so that you can marry into money, because of course that's what you're trying to do. This is actually really neat. It's an action selection game. I would hesitate to call it a worker placement game, since you're not really ever blocking anyone. It's just a matter of, like, do you have the workers to do the actions that you intend to do? Are you actually physically able to perform it? Do you have the servants ready to go? Do you have the cards that you need? That's sort of where the game is at, and it plays fairly quickly, I find, at 1, and I think this would be a really solid 2-player game as well, because I could see it just going back and forth rather effectively. So far, I've just played against the AI, and I've been able to crush it at easy and medium levels of difficulty, so but I was also doing something wrong, so I don't know how much that would affect how hard it would be for me to beat the game at a medium difficulty. So I want to try it again at that difficulty. This is just a theme that I really enjoy, and I'm very glad that I have something that is sort of in that category of a Jane Austen novel or something like Downton Abbey in board game form. And I just really think this was well executed for what they're trying to do, and a game that I could easily recommend to people. It's just maybe a little bit heavier than maybe some people are going to be prepared to deal with. So that is my number 65 obsession. My number 64 is Azul, which is up 19 spots, so quite the riser. Its weight is about a 2, and it plays 2 to 4 players. Azul is a very simple tile collection and drafting game. You essentially have these circular platforms in the middle of the table, which vary in number depending on the number of players that you're playing. You can take all of a single color from a single platform, and if you do, all the remaining tiles go into the center, or you can take from the center. If you do, and you're the first person to do so, you are going to lose a point because you have to take the one-player tile, which goes nowhere in particular. And you will then get all the tiles in the center as well, which can be significantly more that are available on the platforms that start out. All you're trying to do is line them up in 5 rows. A row of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you completely fill in a row, so if you fill in the row of 4 tiles with all blue tiles, you can take one of those blue tiles and put it on the pattern on the right, and the rest just gets thrown back in the box. It's difficult to explain why this one works so well. The drafting system is clever, and it's well executed, and it's very simple to teach. But there are a lot of consequences, and you can easily end up in situations where you literally have no place that you can put something, but you still have to take tiles, and so those just count as negative points against you. That can happen a lot. You can also end up in situations where you're just desperate for black tiles to come out because you just are 2 black tiles short of being able to fill in all of your black tiles and get a 10-point bonus, which is fairly substantial in a game where you can win the game with about 70 points sometimes. And they just don't come out of the bag because there's a ton of yellow tiles that come out instead. That can definitely happen. It's a very attractive game. Maybe not as attractive as another game that has this on it. I don't know if you can see that, but those are some of the tiles that you can collect, and they are these cool looking patterns. It's, I think, one of the current kings of the hill in gateway games, and deservedly so. It is very straightforward and very easy to learn, but there's a fair amount of depth for what is here. It just might happen that I significantly like more another game that has Azul in its name that is not this one. But you will just have to wait and see on what that might be and when it might show up on my list. But for now, my number 64, Azul, very solid game, easy recommendation to just about anyone. My number 63 is Heaven and Ale, which is new to my list. Its weight is about a 7 and plays 2 to 4 players. Heaven and Ale is a tile-laying game, so something like Carcassonne, but there's significantly more going on, and if possible, even less theme than a game like Carcassonne, which is not going to show up on my list, but is certainly a game that I played on my way into my current obsession with board games. Heaven and Ale, basically, there are 2 sides of your field. The one side of the field concentrates on points, and the other one concentrates on money. So if you concentrate on money, maybe you can get more points, but maybe if you just concentrate on points, you're going to get more points in the end anyway. It's kind of hard to say. And then there are these points that are given based on how high a value of tiles that you're picking up, which also tend to cost more. And you also get different bonuses if you get really low value tiles surrounding things, and those are a little bit cheaper, and maybe you can leverage those bonuses in order to, say, get ahead and not pay so much for what you're trying to do. It's a neat game. It's a neat system. It's also, I think, fairly counterintuitive. It's more counterintuitive than it is complex. I tried to explain this to my wife, and she was fairly confused by what we just did in the game, and I can certainly see why, because it's not a game that just leaps off the instruction manual of, oh, and that is how things work because that is how logic works. No, it has its own version of logic, and you kind of just have to learn it. It's also not a game that is particularly thematic. you're just kind of putting tiles on a board. It doesn't really have anything to do with the idea of monks making ale. I'm all for a monks making ale game. I think there should be a heavily thematic monks making ale game. It's just not this one. It's a great name for a game. I really think, I think it really sounds neat. It's like, let's play Heaven and Ale, and then everyone's just like, these are just tiles, and that's all there is to it. Yeah, that's kind of the game. But for what it is, it's still a really high quality game and one that I'm very happy to play at any opportunity. So that is my number 63, Heaven and Ale. My number 62 is Orléans, which is not a game I own, and it is up 5 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 7, and it plays 2 to 4 players. Orléans is an example of sort of what I was talking about earlier on my list, of a game that is not just a deck builder. And technically, it's not a deck builder because it's not involving a deck of cards. It's involving a bag of chips that get built, and you get to put different chips into your bag, and over time you can put better and better chips, which will let you do more and more actions, which will let you accomplish your goals in the game more and more, including moving around a map, which is a mechanism I tend to like, is where part of what you're trying to do is just traveling. Managing the possible resources and managing yourself on some different tracks, that's part of what you're doing as well. Just getting more things into your bag, that's also important. It's just a game that I like on multiple fronts. I don't think I'm especially good at it. I think other people who play Euro games, and this is definitely one of them, tend to be a little bit more experienced at, not experienced, but a little bit more adept at managing to crank points out of the system. I find that I tend to get stuck on the same one or two ways of generating points, and I don't necessarily do it super efficiently in this game. But I recognize that the depth is there, and it's a game that I do enjoy. And I like that flavor of like building a bag of things, and that bag of things getting better. And I like that that's a part and not the whole game. So it's a good example of a game where I just like deck builder as a kind of garnish rather than as a flavor. And again, it's technically not a deck builder because you're building a bag of chips rather than a deck of cards. So that is my number 62, Orléans. And closing out my list is my number 61, Charterstone, which is another game I own but do not have here. It is up 10 spots, so it's definitely risen. Weight is about a 5 and plays 2 to 6 players. I think you can technically play it solo, but don't, probably. Charterstone is a game that I think has moved up simply because, upon further reflection, I've just been underrating it a little bit compared to how much I enjoyed. It's been a great experience each time. It's been a very basic, straightforward worker placement game that has just added a little bit more to what's going on every time the game has come out. I've played it probably about 4 or 5 times, and I think you probably have to play it about a dozen times to get through all of the content. And I have heard from Tom Vassell that the game gets better once it's finished, which I think is a little unusual for a legacy game, which is just a game where you make permanent changes to the game so it kind of evolves and becomes more complex and intricate as you play. I like that aspect here. The story, it doesn't really matter, but the story is fun for the little that it gets used. I just like really straightforward, fast worker placement games. This is a game that just speeds around the table really quickly. And I've been playing it with 4 players, mostly all with members of my family. And every time we play it, it just zips along. So the pace of the game is fast, and the actual time playing it isn't that long. It's just a great, well-paced experience. And that's probably the reason why I've moved it up. I haven't played this in a long time because we weren't playing this. We hadn't played it all that recently by the time COVID hit. And by the time COVID hit, we definitely weren't playing it after that. But it is a game I am eager to get back to, and it is going to round off my list of 10 this time at number 61, Charterstone. So that was my number 61 through 70 of my top 100 board games. We're starting to climb the list now, and as we get higher and higher, I'm sure I'll get more verbose as I have more to say about games that are even closer to my heart than the ones that we've described so far. Plenty of Euro games on here, certainly Charterstone, Orleans, Heaven and Ale, Obsession, Teotihuacan for sure, and definitely some Euro elements in Small World, Stockpile, and Gloomhaven. You could even make an argument, I wouldn't, but you could, that Azul is a sort of Euro game. These are really solid games, and I would recommend them if you're up to the challenge of playing the degree of complexity that each one presents. So, just always bear that in mind. Take on a game that's about the level that you're ready to take on at the moment. So, that's all for this time. Let me know what you think, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.